Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our COVID-19 question and answer session with our cast of all-stars, loosely entitled Protecting Your Loved Ones. My name is Dr. George Bisset. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at Children's Hospital of New Orleans. As we proceed through this question and answer session, if you have questions, you see the chat button at the bottom. Please enter your questions in the chat and we will respond to those toward the end of this session. I want to start out though with a true story. Terry's a 26-year-old man who developed COVID-19 in August of last year. He had a relatively mild case and recovered in a few weeks, but several months later, this is how he describes his life. Quote, "I used to walk my two dogs about 3 miles per day. Now I can't. I'm terribly fatigued every day. I hardly have any appetite and have a constant dry cough. I've been spending much more time in bed, and many days my friend has to take the dogs for a walk." Unquote. It's estimated that up to 3/4 of COVID patients experience at least one long-term effect. So while some people might think they won't get the disease, or if they'll get it, they'll only have mild symptoms, they need to be cautious. COVID-19 can impact every organ in the body, and the lingering effects are still an unknown, underscoring the importance of getting the vaccine. As of last week, only 1 of 4 people in Louisiana was fully immunized against COVID-19, which puts us at about 44th among the states, well below the threshold that we need if we're going to stop the pandemic. What we'll be focusing on today as public health workers is what we have feared, is that vaccine hesitance or resistance is now the major impediment to achieving herd immunity. And we'll talk about herd immunity as we go through this. But the bottom line is that if everyone doesn't get vaccinated, we all lose. So at this time, let me introduce our panelists, and then I'm going to show a very short video about the vaccine. Our first panelist is Dr. Jennifer Avegno. If you've watched any of our local news stations in the last year, you've likely seen and heard Dr. Avegno touting the importance of getting vaccinated. She's a New Orleans native who received her undergraduate degree from Notre Dame, a Master of Arts in Sociology from Tulane, and her medical degree from LSU. She completed her residency at LSU Charity Hospital Emergency Medicine and joined the faculty at both LSU and Tulane shortly after she graduated. She's established the Division of Social Emergency Medicine at LSU to facilitate innovative programming, and she's done huge things to improve population health outcomes. In 2018, she was appointed as the Director of the Health Department for the City of New Orleans, where she manages a team of public health professionals in addressing the critical health needs of our community. She currently leads the city's public health response to COVID-19 and developed one of the country's first mobile community-based testing strategies with core focus on equity and access. Our next panelist is Dr. Tonette Kraussel-Wood. Dr. Kraussel-Wood's research interests are focused on clinical outcomes and healthcare processes for patients with chronic diseases like hypertension, like diabetes. Recent research efforts have included medication adherence in older patients with hypertension, adherence to physical activity recommendations in patients with diabetes, and provider compliance with medication guidelines. Other interests include prevention and control of chronic diseases through lifestyle modifications. She's the past chair of the American Board of Preventive Medicine, where she is currently a trustee, and is a fellow of the American Heart Association. She is the recipient of the Tinsley Harrison Award from the Southern Society for Clinical Investigation. She earned her MD degree, like Dr. Avegno, from LSU, and a Master of Science in Public Health from Tulane. Our last panelist is Dr. Thomas Lavist. Dr. Lavist is Dean of the Tulane University School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine. He has an extensive record of publication in scientific journals, as well as numerous mass media outlets, and is director and executive producer of The Skin You're In, a documentary series about racial inequalities in health. It's an outstanding series. I watched a couple of them myself. I love them. He's also the author of 6 books, including Minority Population and Health, an Introduction to Health Disparities in the United States, which was the first textbook on health disparities. An award-winning research scientist, Dr. Lavist has received the Innovation Award from the NIH, the Knowledge Award from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and was elected to the very prestigious National Academy of Medicine in 2013. Dr. Lavist authored a recent editorial in the New York Times entitled 60 Black Health Experts Urge Black Americans to Get Vaccinated. My role in this event is asking the questions of our panelists that we are being asked about the COVID vaccine. We'll rotate these questions between each of the panelists and give you a chance at the end to enter additional questions, but each of us can feel free to add on to other people's questions. So let me roll this quick video. It only takes about 2 minutes, but it kind of goes over the basics of our 2 most prominent vaccines, the Moderna and the, go ahead.
U.S. authorization of 2 COVID-19 vaccines marked a turning point in the pandemic and vaccine science. These vaccines use messenger RNA, or mRNA, to deliver immunity. mRNA are short strands of instructions used to build proteins. It's impossible for these mRNA vaccines to alter our DNA in any way. Although that technology has been in development for decades, mRNA vaccines hadn't made it to market until now. There are a few ways to make a vaccine. Most use a version of the pathogen they are trying to protect you against, like the flu or measles, to trigger an immune response. You can think of vaccines like a biological wanted poster. They show our bodies how to recognize the enemy, an antigen such as a harmful virus or bacteria, so we know how to react if it ever shows up. Our bodies will be prepared to send T cells to attack infected cells, and B cells to produce antibodies, which neutralize the virus and prevent it from invading healthy cells. mRNA vaccines use innovative technology to deliver protection. If traditional vaccines deliver wanted posters, these vaccines carry USB drives with instructions that tell our cellular machinery how to print its own poster. In other words, they instruct the body to make its own antigens. In the case of the coronavirus, the antigen is the infamous spike protein that attaches to and infects your cells. These vaccines use mRNA, a molecule that our cells need to create any type of protein to introduce us to that spike. To start, researchers isolated the part of the coronavirus's genetic sequence that codes for the spike protein. Then, they put an mRNA molecule containing the code into a super tiny drug delivery system known as a lipid nanoparticle, which can enter our cells. Inside the cell, ribosomes use the code to create a protein chain that resembles the enemy, the coronavirus's spike protein. Those cells can then temporarily display a lookalike of that protein, which prompts our immune cells to respond as if it were an antigen from a traditional vaccine.
All right. Thank you, Allison, for your help with that. Hopefully that gives you just a little bit of an overview of the 2 newer vaccines that we have from Pfizer and Moderna. So let me start out with the questions, and I'll direct each of the questions to one of our panelists, but the others can feel to comment. So, Dr. Lavist, why should I get vaccinated?
Well, there are so many different ways to go with answering that question. First, let me thank you for the opportunity to participate in this important program. But I'm gonna pick one reason that I think we don't talk about as much as we should, which is that the longer we delay in getting vaccinated, the more space we leave for new strains of this virus to develop. So currently, we've got several different variants that are circulating within the country and within our state. The vaccines to date, the vaccines are still effective against these variants, but it's inevitable that there's going to be a strain that will evolve that will be able to resist the vaccine. The longer we wait, the more likely it is that they will come. So the hesitancy in it's kind of ironic, right? That the people that are most concerned about whether the vaccine will be effective are creating the opportunity for a strain that will be able to evade the vaccine will develop. So I think that's one reason to do it. The other reason is that the sooner we get to the point where the transmission rate is so low that we can get back to some semblance of normality, the sooner we get back there, the sooner everyone's going to be able to get back to their normal life. And delaying only just, increases the amount of time it takes for us to get to that point.
Thank you very much. No, I think that's a great answer. Jennifer or Dr. Avegno, sorry.
Please.
One of the questions that I keep getting asked is, how are the vaccines made so quickly, and are they safe? Because, it used to take us years, and now we make them in weeks.
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, thanks for having me. Great to see my colleagues and all of you out there. That is a great question, because yes, the fact that we have 3 highly effective, incredibly safe vaccines in a little over a year since we first knew about this virus is really a modern day miracle. But it didn't just happen out of thin air. The Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines, mRNA vaccines, the technology to make those has been in development for years and has been studied and tested and trialed. There wasn't just the right particular virus to have a full-scale trial of the vaccine for it until coronavirus. It was really kind of a perfect conflagration of events at the right time. All of the research, all of the development that we are generally used to seeing with vaccines that take much longer happen the same way. But the other factor here is that there were a tremendous amount of worldwide resources devoted to nothing but this, to develop safe, effective vaccines that could be given for 8 billion people, because this, we need to vaccinate the entire world. So when you generally develop a drug or a vaccine, there's not nearly that level of funding and research and resources that go into supporting all of the steps, all of the trials that need to happen for it to be declared safe and effective. Now, all of a sudden, the entire focus of the world was on this. So when something's in the world's financial interest, they will put money towards it. So the steps that are followed for all the medications that we take for every other vaccine were still done in the same order, but they could overlap. They could be done more quickly. They could have larger number of people to recruit in clinical trials. And so we got to the same point. We just did it in a really efficient time frame. Now we have, just in the US alone, over 200 million people who have taken one of these 3 vaccines, and with very rare exceptions, which should be discussed but are incredibly rare, it has been amazingly safe. I really don't know of another medication that probably many of us would take, or another vaccine that has this level of safety. So that just goes to show that all of the efforts put in at the front end are really paying dividends for us now, and we're truly lucky to have such wonderful therapeutics at our disposal.
Thank you. Excellent answer. Dr. Kraussel-Wood, we've heard that people get flu shots and they still get influenza. So how effective are the different vaccines for us in keeping us from getting infected?
It's a great question, and it's heartwarming to know that people are asking about the science. They want to know, will it work, and will it work in people like me? And I think those are incredibly important questions. With respect to the vaccines that we have available, not only are they safe, as Dr. Vegno already beautifully described, but they are highly effective. They are greater than 90% effective in keeping people from getting the COVID-19 infection. And it was very important because early on, and in my leadership role with the Community Engagement Alliance Against COVID-19 Disparities, an initiative that's funded by the National Institutes of Health, the focus on disparities and understanding whether or not the vaccines would work in different groups of people became critically important. There was a tremendous push nationwide and actually globally to make sure that people of different groups, men and women, different racial groups, as well as different age groups, were involved in the clinical trials that randomized individuals to getting the vaccine versus getting a placebo, and monitoring how well they did in producing antibodies and keeping themselves safe and effective in having that effect. What is wonderful information for us to have is that the trials that were done had sufficient number of men and women, as well as people across racial groups and age groups, to say that the vaccines are effective, over 90% effective, in preventing men and women across racial groups, and now including children, in getting the COVID-19 infection. So this is really tremendous news for us. I don't know that initially that they expected the efficacy to be as high as it is, because it, as Dr. Vegno already mentioned, there are other vaccines and other medicines that don't work this well and are this safe. And so we're very fortunate that we've got the number that we have that are safe and are effective.
All right, that great answer. So we know that it's effective, highly effective, and we know that it's safe. Dr. Vegno, how long will this vaccine last? How long will it be effective?
Well, that's another good question. And we have to be honest and say we don't really have that answer yet. All we know is what we are seeing as we vaccinate more and more people, and we get out farther and farther from when we began vaccination. We know that it is at least 6 months, probably more like 9 months, we can safely say now, for the vaccination protection, but we expect it to be a lot longer. Now, many public health experts do think that just like a flu shot or a tetanus shot or several other vaccines, we might have to get a booster shot every so often to remind our immune system, hey, don't forget, if you see this virus come knocking, this is what it looks like, and fight it off. But we don't know if that's going to be a yearly thing like a flu shot, or it might be even longer than that. There's a lot of research going on right now. In fact, I believe today Moderna just announced some results of its trial on doing booster shots and the safety and efficacy of those. What we do know that, though, is that getting COVID and having that natural immunity that you have after you get a virus doesn't seem to last as long as the vaccine does. And that's not surprising. COVID is the disease caused by a coronavirus. There are many coronavirus out there. Everybody listening today has had a coronavirus. It's a common cold. And what we know about general coronaviruses is that when you get them, for whatever reason, your natural immunity does not last very long. So that's why you get a cold the next year or later on in that year. We're seeing that with COVID. We've seen people who have gotten COVID once and then a couple of months later gotten it again and been very, very sick the second time. So I know sometimes folks say, well, I had COVID back last year, so I'm good. I don't need to have the shot. And actually you do, because that shot, that vaccine is going to protect you far more, not only from getting it again, but from getting it from the new strains that have developed since you got it the first time.
All right, and that may be another reason that you have to get it in a year, is if we have new strains, we have mutant strains, that each year the influenza virus gets finely tuned. And I'm guessing the same thing might happen with the COVID vaccine. Dr. Lavist, we talked about the mRNA vaccines on the video. but there are some other vaccines out there. Johnson & Johnson has one. Can you get COVID from the vaccine?
No, you can't get COVID from the vaccine. I do understand where that comes from, because there was this that used to be the way it was done in some previous cases, that there were sort of portions of the DNA from the vaccine that was actually from the virus that was actually used in the vaccine. But that is not the way the mRNA vaccines work, as that video just described. So it's not possible to get the virus from the vaccine, because the vaccine does not contain the virus. It contains instructions for your body to create the antibodies that will respond to the vaccine, to the virus, but it doesn't actually give you any portion of the virus.
Okay, thank you very much. Dr. Kraussel-Wood, are there any short and long-term effects from the vaccine? This is a tough one.
Right. No, well, again, a great question that's coming from the community, and we hear this a lot. So in the short term, most people have what we call reactions to the vaccine. Some will say that this is actually showing you the vaccine is working. You may have a sore arm, some myalgias, a little muscle soreness, maybe a low-grade fever, feeling tired for a couple of days. But in the vast majority of people, these short-term reactions last less than 48 hours and often resolve either on their own, or some people will take Tylenol to make themselves feel better. The rare events that we have heard about on the news are just that. They are extraordinarily rare, and if they do happen, they happen in a relatively short amount of time. Many organizations, as you know, if you go get the vaccine, or you've heard of others who have had it, they will watch you for a certain amount of time within 30 minutes after getting the vaccine to make sure that you don't have an allergic reaction. Again, allergic reactions are very rare, but there's a mechanism for doing that. And now there's a mechanism for monitoring any other side effects that individuals may be having. But let me restate, in the short term, most patients only have minor reactions in soreness, feeling a little low-grade fever, feeling a little tired, and that's not in all patients, but in some people. The long-term effects of vaccines, there is, with our decades and longer than that experience with vaccination, there's no real evidence that there are long-term effects of vaccines, right? We've got them as children, we get them as adolescents now, and now as adults, we're getting them as shingles, flu vaccines, and the like. To our knowledge, at least currently, there are no long-term effects of the COVID-19 vaccine. This is a new vaccine. It'll continue to be monitored. And as everyone has seen, it's a very open and transparent process. As things are identified, they are shared widely via the media and other mechanisms so that everyone is aware. But to date, we are not aware of any long-term effects of the COVID-19 vaccine and don't anticipate it based on our experience with vaccines in the past.
And just let me follow up a little bit more on that. Are there any harmful ingredients in the vaccine that we should be worried about?
So I'll answer, and I think Dr. Vegno may want to ask more. The ingredients that are in the vaccines are listed. There's nothing that is really harmful in them, unless, of course, you have an allergic reaction to a component. So individuals, unlike some of the vaccines that are based in eggs, this is not one of those. So you don't have that type of a reaction, an allergic reaction. But this information is widely available. Individuals who suspect that they could have an allergic reaction can review this with their healthcare provider to ensure that they don't expect this. But in general, there are no harmful components of the vaccine. Dr. Vegno, it looks like you might want to add something to that.
Yeah, I'll just add that, whenever you take a medication, the part of that pill, that pink pill, that white pill, whatever it is, that is the actual medication that is designed to do whatever it's supposed to do, is very small. And there's a lot of ingredients in it that are fillers or to stabilize the medication so that it can sit in a bottle on your shelf for a certain period of time before you take it. It's the same way with vaccines. The extra ingredients that go into a vaccine are there to make sure that that vaccine stays stable in the bottle so that when it gets to you, do, all you get is the real effect of the compound, that's there, the mRNA vaccine that's there. So it's not any different than any medication we might take that there's extra ingredients in the vaccine.
Thank you, Dr. Vigno. All right, I'll stay with you for a second. If I'm young, should I be worried about the effects of the vaccine on my ability to get pregnant if I'm a female, or long-term fertility if I'm a male?
This is a good question because it has gotten so much media attention, and it's really quite damaging. This is an insidious rumor. There is absolutely no evidence nor any physiologic reason why any vaccine would cause infertility, either in the short term or the long term. This started with a rumor that went viral and unfortunately has taken hold. What we do know is that the vaccine is highly recommended in pregnant women because pregnant women who contract COVID are at significant risk of serious illness or death of themselves and their baby. We also know that it appears that if you are vaccinated, you can transmit antibodies to your baby while you are breastfeeding. And so you can protect your baby because your baby can't even get a vaccine yet. And we do know that babies can get COVID. During both the trial period and since we vaccinated hundreds of millions of people, many women have successfully gotten pregnant before, during, and after their COVID vaccinations. So there is absolutely no evidence to this. I will tell you, I have 3 teenage daughters, and they are 100%, even though I hope to be a grandmother someday, there is no hesitation in my mind that they shouldn't get the vaccine, and they are actively getting it.
Great points. Dr. Lavist, what about underlying medical conditions? I realize that that's a really complicated question because it could be all kinds of medical conditions, but how do you deal with that? Somebody writes the question, I've got rheumatoid arthritis, should I get the vaccine? How do you deal with that?
I do think that this is a case where patients should talk to their primary care physicians and have that consultation, because I don't want to say that there are no counterindications, but there may be, and I can't speak to the specific case of any individual patient, but I'd say I'm not aware of that, if it being problematic to get the vaccine if you have arthritis or any of these conditions that you described. But I do think if you have concerns, I would advise you to talk to your doctor before getting the vaccine.
Excellent advice. Thank you. Dr. Vigno, back to you again. I think Dr. Kraussel mentioned the reactions to the vaccine. It seems like it's relatively commonplace. I would say after my second Pfizer vaccine, I felt pretty bad for a day. Should we be expecting those kinds of reactions?
Yeah, those have been very, very common, particularly with the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. And they don't really seem to affect one type of person over the other. I got Pfizer. Other than a sore arm after the second one, I didn't have any issues. My mom got Pfizer, and she didn't feel great for the day after. She was in bed, she felt achy, she had a headache, she had a little bit of a low-grade fever, but then by 24 hours, she was completely recovered. We've seen lots of those type of reactions, both as an ER doctor and as someone who has run vaccine sites, and we continue to run vaccine sites and monitor these things. That's a pretty common occurrence, but really very, very, very few cases that are serious. Serious side effects, a serious allergic reaction, or somebody who felt so bad for a long period of time that they couldn't go back to work. And if you think about it, a day, a couple of hours of feeling cruddy is nothing compared to being on a ventilator, struggling to breathe with COVID. So if you're looking at which one is, more harmful, certainly the chance of catching COVID and having a really serious outcome from it is a lot worse than having to lay in bed for a couple of hours.
Yeah.
Right.
Could I comment about that a little bit? Because I think that's really important. So public health is really all about risk. Nothing is 100%, right? So it's always risk. It's how much risk are you willing to accept, and how do you mitigate or reduce your risk, right? So if you think of the risk of getting COVID, right, versus the risk of the vaccine, the evidence that we have at this point is quite clear. We have a handful of cases of people that have had, allergic reactions and other, adverse outcomes. There was the Johnson & Johnson vaccine with a handful of cases of, blood clots. And we've got over 500,000 Americans that are dead, that have died from this virus, right? So if you look at the risk, and then among those that have had COVID and didn't die, we know that there are people who have have been struggling long-term with ongoing health challenges, and we don't know how long those challenges will be there. So when you think of the risk of not getting vaccinated, the evidence is so much on the side of getting vaccinated that you really have to think about that as well. Now, we don't know the long-term risk of the vaccine. We don't know. Maybe 30 years from now, you'll grow a second head. I don't know. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen. We have no reason to believe that that's the case. Everything we know at this point suggests that there are no long-term negative effects of getting vaccinated, but we're quite clear on the long-term effects of the virus. So just from a risk-reward standpoint, that's another thing that I think people should think about.
Great points. Thank you very much. Those are great points. Dr. Kraussel, we've talked a little bit about these new variants, and I think I read recently that the Brazil variant has been reported in the state of Louisiana. Is this vaccine going to protect us against these variants?
Another great question. There's a lot of interest and attention on the variants because of the unknowns. So the data that we have to date is that the vaccines are offering protection against the variants. And every day, perhaps there are more that are growing in different environments. We are now hearing a lot of attention around variants in India as well. With the way we travel, not only in the United States, but also across groups, that variants will travel as well. So it's so very important that we're asking the question, that we're monitoring, and that to date we're seeing that the vaccines are effective and in protecting. Now, as Dr. Vegno already mentioned, in Moderna, it was on the news this morning, they are developing boosters, and they're testing the boosters to see that they are effective against the variants. So again, an argument about vaccination so that we can increase the number of people who have these antibody fighting elements in their bodies to keep the virus itself from perpetuating and growing across our communities. We can keep the number of variants down, right? Because it won't have a chance to mutate if people are vaccinated and are able to fight the disease before it can set up camp, if you will, in our bodies. So our data to date are signaling that the vaccines are working, but we have to continue to monitor that, and boosters are in development to make sure that we have the extra protection that may be needed to fight these variants.
Thank you. And I think Dr. Lavist's earlier comments about getting vaccinated now before we start to see the variants, I think is beneficial to all of us. What do you do? What do you say, Dr. Lavist, what do you say to people that say, boy, I'm just afraid of needles? Is there any other way to get the vaccine?
I don't know that I have the most effective strategy, but one strategy is to kind of describe what is it like to be intubated. Being intubated is a pretty unpleasant thing. And
absolutely,
I compare that to getting a needle. I think I'd rather take the needle, but you have to be considerate of people's legitimate concerns and fears and anxieties. And you have to kind of, we have to take needles sometimes because we do need the protections that come with the medications that are being delivered. And currently, it's the only way we have of delivering this vaccine.
Yeah, great points. I don't like needles particularly,
Yeah,
but
no one likes them, I don't think.
you got to give somebody your arm to put the needle in. I keep hearing about herd immunity, and I know Dr. Kraussel has written an article, because I have it over here on my desk, on herd immunity. What is it, and why do we keep hearing? What are the implications?
Sure. Well, herd immunity is what happens. Maybe a better term would be to say community immunity, right? Herd refers to cattle, but you'll get the general idea. So this is a situation in which enough people in the community have the antibodies against the COVID-19 disease that protects the community as a whole. In general, although we don't have all the specifics around COVID, it's still a relatively new virus. We expect that about 70 to 90%, or perhaps on average 80% of people in a community would need to have these antibodies in order to have this protection of the entire community. The herd immunity occurs in two ways. One is by getting the infection, which Dr. Avegno has already mentioned. Although it does give you antibodies, it's not as long lasting, durable, or perhaps as strong as an effect as you get with the vaccine. The second way that we build up our antibodies, and I call it sort of a boot camp for the body, right? They get the vaccine, and you're training the body, building the muscle to fight COVID-19 when it tries to invade you later, right? So the vaccines are a safer way of reaching herd immunity, because you don't get sick from the virus other than the short-term reactions that most people get, and yet your body is still able to build up the immunity that it needs to fight the disease. Why this is important and why you don't need 100%, we have some people who simply cannot get a vaccine, either because they have underlying health conditions that contraindicated in getting the vaccine, or they have severe allergic reactions. So by all of us who are able to get the vaccine, getting vaccinated, we protect those who are the most vulnerable from disease, from getting COVID-19. So that's what we're aiming to achieve, is that we get a sufficient number of people in our community that have this immunity and protect our entire community, our entire herd, against COVID-19. And this is going to be a long-term commitment for us, right? As we need to make sure, as we know about the immunity we get from measles vaccination, we've heard about smallpox. This is nothing new to medicine or to public health. But where the levels of community immunity fall below the threshold, the disease can proliferate again. It can come in and invade you. They go into the least protective areas and can invade again and cause problems in our community. We've seen that, everyone knows, with the measles outbreak, correct? It has happened in the United States. It happens in other areas of the US where these levels of immunity fall below the threshold. So this is what we are aiming to achieve, is to protect our community here in New Orleans, here in Louisiana, here in our nation and worldwide, to keep this deadly virus from invading our communities and costing us so much.
Yeah, no, I think those are great comments. So we've got that threshold that's somewhere around 70 to 90%. But as I told you at the beginning, only 1 out of 4 individuals in the state of Louisiana is fully vaccinated. So we got a lot of work to do. And that's kind of the point of putting on a session like this. Dr. Lavist, if I get the vaccine, will it be easier to travel, and will I still have to wear a mask when I travel?
Yeah. So this is an issue. So CDC guidelines still ask that you wear a mask even if you've been vaccinated. I do believe that we will be getting new guidance, hopefully in the next few weeks or so, that will give more guidance that would provide more opportunity for people who have been vaccinated to not have to mask in certain situations, particularly outdoor. So I do think that we'll start seeing guidance come out of CDC that will begin to start lifting some of those restrictions for people who have been vaccinated. But currently, I would still suggest following CDC's guidelines and waiting until they've made those changes.
Thank you. I'm getting to the end of the question, so we're going to go to the chat here in just a moment. I guess the last question that I wanted to ask, and it can be anybody, the J&J vaccination or vaccine was temporarily suspended by the CDC and the FDA as a result of clotting issues. We now have a term for that. It's the thrombosis and thrombocytopenia syndrome, and it was put on hold. But the incidence was like 6 per 6.8 million. So it's less common than, or less of a risk than getting hit by lightning in the next year or dying in a plane crash. But they're very cautious, and they took it off the market. They evaluated it more thoroughly, and now it's back and available. Should we still get the Johnson & Johnson vaccine if it's available and it's the only one we can get?
Well, I would say that those events in which J&J was paused and thoroughly studied for that side effect really are great evidence that the focus is on absolute safety and understanding every risk and being completely transparent. You know, as you say, this is about a 1 in a million event. The risk of dying in the United States, if you add up all of the deaths from COVID in the last year and the population of the United States, it's about 1 in 600. So your risk of dying from COVID not vaccinated is far higher than this event. And there's plenty of other things we do every day that are much riskier than that. But we are all, as scientists and health practitioners, appreciative of the fact that we do now have this additional body of information to make decisions. We have, in our events, and several of our partners have reintroduced Johnson & Johnson. We are giving folks a choice, of course, because we never want to turn anybody away from a vaccine event. But we're really excited that a lot of people are still very interested in taking Johnson & Johnson. They appreciate the ease. They appreciate that it's one and done. They don't have to come back. The side effects have not really slowed anybody down. They've been fairly mild for most people, which is encouraging. And Johnson & Johnson is a vaccine that their trials took place when some of our major variants had started to circulate. And so we know that it performs pretty well against many of these variants. So it is still a very attractive option. If you feel, though, that you are at high risk of blood clots, it's definitely a conversation with your physician or at the vaccine site. And certainly, if you feel that this is not the right vaccine for you, there will be other choices. But we're excited to have it back because we know we're going to be able to reach folks with it and protect them, and they might not have been otherwise.
And the idea, particularly when you get to some of the third world countries, of being able to give one injection probably is a great selling point. Let me go to the chat and see what questions we've got here. I think the first questions we've already answered. I think, are we going to require boosters, much like the flu vaccine? I think we've dealt with that. The next question is, what are the trials or timelines for vaccines for younger than 16-year-old? And what is the current landscape of multi-inflammatory syndrome in kids?
I'm happy to speak on the younger because I have a 12 and a 15-year-old, and we have been waiting for this day. Pfizer announced this week that they will likely, they will be reviewed by the FDA for extension of their vaccine to 12 through 15-year-olds within the next several days. So we anticipate that the Pfizer vaccine will be available to those as young as 12 by midweek next week, or even sooner. This is tremendous. In fact, the clinical trials of this age group were even more effective than they were in adults. It conferred nearly 100% protection in this age group. And while children generally have a lower risk of getting severe COVID, there have been children who have contracted it, been hospitalized, died, and or passed it on to vulnerable family members. And in the chat, someone had brought up the multi-inflammatory MISC. I'm not going to remember what it stands for at the moment. That is still a significant concern. It is a rare complication of COVID, but it does affect children more than adults, and can cause some pretty significant health problems for children that we don't really know what the full extent are. We don't know how long they last, and we don't know, when exactly what to treat them with in the best way. So for my family, for my children, I don't want to take that risk, just as I don't want them to get measles and I don't want them to get polio. This is something I definitely don't want to get them. So I'm really excited we will have an option for, some of our pre-adolescents and teens.
Thank you. Any other comments on that one? Is the Indian variant the deadliest of all variants so far? I mean, we're hearing in the news about hundreds of thousands of patients being infected every day, and the death rate is incredible. Is it because the variant is so deadly, or is it because of it's more communicable? I think they're probably, I don't know whether anybody knows the answers to those questions, but
I know that the researchers are on it and that they are looking at this variant. We've got individuals here at Tulane, Dr. Bob Gary and his group, that are tracking this actively and looking at this variant in comparison to the others. So I think active monitoring of this is going to be critically important, and I think more information will be coming available, in the very near future as we learn more.
thank you. Is there a global depository where we can pull up our vaccine when traveling, or will the vaccine card be sufficient? That's a great question. I'm not sure.
I think that's a Jen question.
I think we're already there in some points. Will there be a single system in which everybody puts their vaccine card? Probably not. I think the cat's out of the bag. I think that would be very tricky to navigate between countries and businesses and nonprofits and all that. So, just yesterday, the state announced that you can now link your vaccination record on your LA Wallet app, what many of us have to have our driver's license. So in case we forget our driver's license, it's there on our phone. That is an excellent tool to keep it handy. Europe is poised to allow American travelers with proof of vaccination. I haven't seen if they specify what kind of proof, whether it's your actual card, whether they would, most likely they'll have a list of apps that are approved for entry. And I think that you're going to see that more and more. I think you're seeing this in certain large events. Certain large sports teams have come out and said, we want to have 100% of people in our stadium. So, to do that, everyone's going to have to show proof of vaccination or a negative test. You're seeing that with big events like fairs and festivals and other places. So I do think that this will be part of life and part of the things that we want to do. I know that Dr. Lavist and Dr. Kraussel, your institution is looking very strongly into requiring vaccinations for students, just as you would require it. My alma mater, the University of Notre Dame, has required it. And of course, students will be required to show proof in some way. So I do think we should expect that in order to participate in some parts of life, things that maybe we want to do, not so much we need to do, like go to the grocery store, that we're going to have some way to show our vaccination status. So if you get vaccinated, hold on to your card, take a picture of it for now, and then figure out what the best app is for you.
Great comments. The question was raised with regard to herd immunity. What percentage of the US population is children under age 16? Ooh. But I got an answer for that one. I'm not sure, but they say is Chinola testing for the variants. I don't think most places are doing testing for variants. They're doing testing to say COVID positive or not. But I don't know what, maybe Dr. Vigno, what stimulates somebody obviously there were a couple people tested that have the Brazil variant here in Louisiana.
Right. So the CDC generally does sequencing on certain samples. The states send, a small number of randomly chosen samples to the CDC, and the CDC has the capability to run it for all of the variants, and then they send it back to the state and they say, oh, you've got 2 cases of this variant or that. That is a very lengthy process, unfortunately. And so by the time you get the news, that variant's been there for a couple of weeks, most likely. I do know that there are some local labs who are doing some sequencing. That's something actually that there's a good deal of funding for in the American Rescue Plan. So the hope is that funding will spur more labs to be able to do that locally and have a much quicker turnaround time. It's really important for me at the health department to understand in real time, where do we have, a variant of concern? Is there an outbreak in a certain area, or is it sprinkled throughout the community? Where did it come from? What do we have to do? What's the vaccination rates in that community? How do we need to fight this? So I know there's some local folks who have been doing this and are really trying to make it a more robust system, and we're hopeful that that will continue.
Thanks. And there was another question about how long do you think it'll take to get the vaccine to the really younger group, like the 8-year-olds, 7, 6, 7, 8-year-olds?
I think that Pfizer plans, they are doing trials, I believe it's Pfizer, correct me if I'm wrong, on ages 2 and up, and they plan to have their data ready by the end of summer to present to FDA. So it is not out of the realm of possibility that in the fall, all school-age children could be authorized for a vaccine. I will say also that all of these vaccines are under emergency use authorization, which is exactly the way vaccines, roll out. Pfizer, though, has applied, given that we've done hundreds of millions of vaccinations, there's ample data to apply for full authorization, and they expect to have that by the end of the summer. That means this vaccine is just like every other vaccine that we all got as a kid. There's nothing special, there's nothing experimental, there's nothing different about it. And so it'll be able to be treated just like your measles, just like your tetanus, just, like everything else.
Thank you very much. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and we've got just a few minutes left. I want to say, give you my my sincerest thanks for participating for this group of all-stars. I thought the question and answer session was outstanding. This is recorded so that others, if they have questions, can refer back to this. We hope that this becomes a video that becomes very popular with the people that are vaccine hesitant. I guess I would close with this. If you really don't want the vaccine for yourself, consider getting it for your colleagues, your friends, your loved ones. Get it so that one day soon we can go to the movies or a football game or a party without a mask, or get on board a flight without a mask. Get it so that we can, one of the things that I miss is shaking hands. So get it so that you can shake hands or you can hug each other without fear. I think, as I said before, I think if there are lots of people that are not getting vaccinated, we're all going to lose. Any last comments from any of the panelists? Allison, I want to thank you for running the show. You did a fantastic job. Thank you very much. I appreciate you all participating, and we look forward to more comments as people watch the video. Thank you.
Thank you.